reduce its energy use. But there are tremendous opportunities through lighting. I can't really see into these, but I'm quite sure that those are not incandescent light bulbs. I should say that the U.S. law that led to the phase out of incandescent light bulbs, that one law signed by the second President Bush in 2007, ultimately will save in a year the electricity equivalent of the output of 11 nuclear power plants. So we're not talking about small numbers. We're not talking about things that hobbyists do. We're talking about energy efficiency measures that can have a massive beneficial effect. So improving the lighting, improving methods of heating and cooling and ventilation, improving the skin around the building so that they are better insulated, improving water efficiency, both because it takes a lot of energy to pump the water, takes a lot of energy to heat water when you need hot water, takes energy shortage, water shortages themselves are a real problem with climate change. So all of that fits in together. Tremendous potential for technologies to improve the efficiency of appliances and equipment. One example that has already been done, refrigeration technology has become immensely more energy efficient over the years. There are lots and lots of opportunities for efficiency. Transport. The single largest source of greenhouse gas emissions in the United States today is coal-fired power plants. The second largest is motor vehicles. The single most important measure in terms of just quantitative impact that the United States government has taken to reduce greenhouse gas emissions is the tightened fuel economy standards on motor vehicles that President Obama introduced and that is leading to a doubling of fuel efficiency standards. The U.S. fuel economy standards for autos still lag those of much of the rest of the world. Our cars are less efficient than those of Europe and of Japan and of China, but they are improving. There are major opportunities for more efficient industrial activities, and another area of public policy is that production of protein through meat is also extraordinarily inefficient from an energy and climate perspective. And again, that's another public policy area that is not usually covered in climate change regulation. So using energy more efficiently is of utmost importance. Then to the extent we still need energy, renewables are obviously a major step in the right direction. And I'll say a word more about that in a minute. Under most scenarios, nuclear power is an important part of the overall mix in trying to address these problems. A lot of work is going on around the world in advanced reactor designs. One area where we are very much behind is nuclear waste disposal. The United States does not have a system in place for coping with that. But there are obviously many perils and concerns with nuclear power, but when you look at the various scenarios, it's very few for how we fill that enormous gap. It's hard to find those that don't have some portion of nuclear power. And then finally going to fuels that have that are fossil fuels that have lower carbon. Natural gas the amount of natural gas extraction has been growing rapidly. It is leading to a reduction in coal use, which as far as it goes is very good. However, there is considerable uncertainty about how much of the natural gas leaks out. Natural gas is mostly methane. A report came out just yesterday suggesting that there's a lot more leakage than had been anticipated. Until certain current ongoing studies are completed, there's going to be a big degree of uncertainty about just on a net basis how much is saved by conversion from natural gas to coal, from coal to natural gas. But even under a best case scenario, you still have a lot of emissions because it still is a fossil fuel, even if none of it leaks out. It's half the emissions of coal, which is twice as good as coal, but not nearly as good as renewables or efficiency. Another way that we'll be hearing about from the next speaker is to use waste materials for energy and for other purposes. There are a number of technologies that are being developed and that are very important for advancing the use of renewables. One other piece of very good news is that the price of solar photovoltaics has been dropping dramatically in the last several years, and I know that Taiwan is a major manufacturer of that technology. Reducing the price of wind turbines and other elements of renewable energy systems is very important. Creating buildings so that solar and wind and such alternative energy sources are integrated into the design of the building, into the skin of the building or its design is very important. In order to maximize the use of renewable energy, we need to be able to address the problem of intermittency, the problem that the wind doesn't always blow and the sun doesn't always shine. And so in order for these to be really maximized, it's important to come up with better ways to store the energy when it comes in, so that you will still have energy to use when it's not coming in, when it's night or the wind is still. So technology is developing for more storage of electricity, for storage of heat, so that the heat can be used, and very importantly, in vehicles. Electric vehicles are one important piece of the puzzle, to the extent that the electric vehicles get their energy from renewable sources as opposed to from coal, which wouldn't accomplish anything. So development of better battery technologies is another high priority. Another high priority to maximize the utilization of renewables and to minimize waste is a more comprehensive transmission network that will allow electricity to be brought in from the areas where the sun is shining or the wind is blowing, or there are other sources, to areas that don't have that, and methods to moderate the demand for electricity using a whole variety of technologies that are available. Microgrids and combined heat and power are another classification of energy efficiency measures that maximize the use of energy in building heats and ventilating, heating and cooling buildings and creating hot water and that kind of thing. In general, technologies for the electrification of transport and buildings would ease the task of using new clean energy sources. And finally, advanced biofuels that use plants that would otherwise be grown anyway do not compete with food supply, with food crops, is another important area. So the third classification is capturing the carbon before it gets into the atmosphere. The technology of carbon capture and sequestration has been under development for years, and the particular pieces of it are in place in various places, but there is not yet any commercial scale application of it at a coal-fired power plant, which is where we really need it. So these technologies are being developed at a much slower pace than would be ideal. One of the challenges would be that sequestration, you would put it in underground reservoirs, typically things like oil or places where oil and gas have been extracted, and you can put it in there. It's not clear anyone actually wants to live on top of a reservoir for massive amounts of pressurized CO2. Siting of these reservoirs in sufficient quantities is going to be a massive challenge on top of everything else. It's one thing to build a new facility that has this. It's quite another to take an existing coal-fired power plant to try to install this kind of technology retrospectively. Whether they have the space and the connections and so forth is a big question. Finally, it appears from what we now know that it takes a lot of energy to run one of these, and also it takes a lot of water. So that we may have to burn more fossil fuel in order to capture the fossil fuel. So under most of the calculations we saw, we need a lot of this, but it is not nearly as far along as it should be. Now, number 4 is moving into the realm of the purely fanciful. But there are scientists here at Columbia University who are working on the idea of this technology, and some other scientists elsewhere. The notion is, can we figure out a way to capture the CO2 that is in the atmosphere? And this is a concept put out by Professor Klaus Lackner, who's a scientist here, an engineer here, and she's a physicist at Columbia doing a lot of the pioneering work, but this is still desktop kind of stuff, and it would be years away if it could actually be commercially developed, and if it could reduce the amount of CO2 in the atmosphere, it would be marvelous, but that is far from around the corner. Finally, and most dangerously, we are hearing more talk about the concept of geoengineering, the idea that we will use either artificial aerosols that might be put in the atmosphere by airplanes or space mirrors or something to try to reduce the amount of solar radiation coming into the planet to reduce the warming. 5 years ago, I never heard anything about this. Today, I'm hearing talk of it more and more. It is profoundly dangerous because it would be the world's largest experiment in atmospheric chemistry and ecological, whatever you can think of. If you try to reduce the amount of sunlight, many things in the natural world depend on a certain amount of sunlight coming in. But the more the nations of the world fall behind in reducing the greenhouse gas emissions, the more we hear about the possibility of this dangerous technology going forward. So in order to advance these technologies, we need a lot of work in a lot of different areas. We need massive amounts of research and development in every one of these technologies to just come up with the concepts and figure out the overall structure and the physics and the chemistry and so forth. We then need to deploy it to demonstrate it at a commercial scale to show that it works not only in the laboratory but out in the field. Then we need to diffuse it, and the number of units of solar panels and wind farms and geothermal energy and hydropower, and nuclear power plants, and everything else that will be needed is immense. It is a massive project. And in order for any of this to happen, we need the right kind of economic incentives. For energy efficiency in particular, most of the measures pay themselves back, but it takes some years to get there. So someone has to come up with the money up front to pay for it. The fossil fuel industry has been receiving massive subsidies of various kinds for many decades. We now see a lot of subsidies going into renewables, but we will need more of that. And of course, the biggest subsidy of all that fossil fuels receive is that they are able to dump their greenhouse gases and other air pollutants into the atmosphere for free. They externalize all of these costs. If they had to pay for that, if they had to pay for the privilege of dumping all of this contamination into the atmosphere, it would be a much different story. And that's why it's so important to have a price on carbon, whether it's in the form of a carbon tax or a cap and trade system or some other mechanism that equalizing the playing field so that the emissions of fossil fuel has to pay its own way, which would immediately improve the comparative economics of energy efficiency and renewables. That is one of the very important measures that we have to take. But as you can see, it's a massive project for the entire world for the decades to come. The students who are here can be assured that for their entire working lives, we will be at work at this. And so I'm very hopeful that the students who are here carry forward in that important work, and we're delighted to have colleagues all around the world working on advancing these technologies. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Gerard, for enlightening us with these realities and also for the great ideas that led us to think about and also to take actions to save energy and protect the environment. Thank you very much for being our inspiration. As always, Professor Michael Gerard. Our next speaker is Arthur Huang. He's one of the youngest, most talented and outstanding architects we have in Taiwan. And for a good reason, their company keep winning awards and awards year after year and appear in TV, CNN, New York Times, Economist, and he designed the EcoArc and many, many innovations, technologies to protect the environment and eco-sustainability. So ladies and gentlemen, give you Arthur Huang.
carbon abatement diagram, well, the cost-saving part is a low-hanging fruits. Okay, so that is the easiest solution for all the engineers to tackle on, at least when we're studying. Just figuring out how to dispose your nuclear waste, how to change your LED light bulbs. And most of that category in the carbon abatement diagram in McKinsey's 2006 diagram is actually on building systems. Like you talk about the skin system for buildings. So just think about, even though this is a LEED certified building, I'd like to challenge you guys to think about the chair that you're sitting on. What material is it made from? The carpet that we're standing on. The paint that we use. It's actually all made from virgin material. This is an old building using virgin material. We're adding another layer of virgin material on top of that whole system that we have. Just think about this piece of glass here, or for example, the curtain that require all kinds of fireproofing. What kind of toxic chemical are we putting in there just to meet our fire code? And we need that actually, because this urbanity is growing. This urbanity grew, we have the need to protect each other in the urban cities. So these chemicals are actually necessary. Every time we're adding these chemicals, we're actually putting a lot into the atmosphere. Henceforth, that we have all these emissions. So if today reduction is the only way to go, so how do we reduce? So I think this is the question that we ask ourselves about, I would say a good 20 years of my life. I want to devote the rest of my creative talent or creative energy in the future to focus on how to make what we just talked about, Professor Cher's presentation, into demonstrating commercial viability. So we did a lot of demonstrations. So I think I would like to encourage that there's plenty of talents here, but I think a lot of our talents are very focused on one single category, but we're dealing with the system problem. A system problem, that is a reality. The reality is a system problem. So I really don't think we can just focus on one solution alone. So I think one of the things that's very real to us currently is the internet. I think this information about carbon footprint, about all kinds of technology that's available to us has been around. And all technology has been documented for the last 2,000 years. It's all online. So all of a sudden, this has become an equalizer. A guy from China, a guy from the United States, a guy from Europe will have the same information, and we can share. And that's a new technology platform that's never enabled before. However, I think this is also very scary because that brought a lot of manufacturing to Asia. So the manufacturing sector shift to Asia. So right now, even many of the trash is actually being shipped to Asia. So how about this? Just think about the biggest city in Asia. What do you think? Which one is the biggest city in Asia? Most advanced civilization, but urban center in Asia? Tokyo? Hong Kong. Okay. What about the West? Okay. What about the West? Like I would say New York, but I don't know. Maybe I don't know New York well enough. But I would say, at least in Hong Kong, we don't recycle. We have recycle bins, but we don't recycle. Actually, they actually dump everything together and mush it together and send it to China and burn it or landfill. Okay. What do we do in New York? About the same, actually. We ship it down to maybe, I don't know which, no longer New Jersey, but definitely North Carolina, South Carolina, somewhere. But you gotta think about the city as a organism intake so much raw material. Oh, what happened to all these waste materials?